The town of Umuahia was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. It was a place where community bonds ran deep, and the church was the pillar that held everything together. For Desmond, a young and earnest altar server, the church had always been a sanctuary. It was where he found peace, guidance, and a sense of purpose. Having grown up in this town, Desmond was well respected and loved by the congregation, especially by Reverend Father Isaac, a priest who had been a constant figure in his life. Father Isaac had always been a symbol of strength, wisdom, and moral clarity. To Desmond, the Reverend Father was more than just a spiritual leader. He was a father figure, a role model, someone who commanded respect and admiration. But the deeper Desmond became involved with his duties at the church, the more he started to notice small, unsettling things. Father Isaac's attention toward him grew oddly personal, more frequent pats on the back, lingering touches on his shoulders, compliments that seemed a little too intimate for a priest. Desmond shrugged it off at first, convincing himself that it was just the Reverend's way of showing affection. After all, Father Isaac was well known for his warmth toward everyone, and maybe he was just being friendly. However, as the weeks went on, the boundaries that should have been there started to blur. It wasn't just affection anymore. It was an unmistakable, unsettling attention that left Desmond feeling uncomfortable, but also unsure of how to react. He couldn't quite understand why something that seemed innocent on the surface made him feel so wrong. Desmond loved his church, his community, and most of all, he trusted Father Isaac. What would happen if he spoke out? Would anyone believe him? Father Isaac had always been a figure of reverence in the community. In Umuahia, where tradition and faith guided every part of life, he was the steady hand everyone turned to. He was the kind of priest who could command an entire room with his voice alone, weaving tales of morality and wisdom that made the congregation feel like they were part of something greater. With his thick white robes and silver cross that glimmered under the church lights, he exuded an aura of righteousness, of being untouchable. But what the townspeople didn't know, what Desmond didn't realize until much later, was that the man they all admired had a dark side. As a young altar server, Desmond had always looked up to Father Isaac. His sermons were inspirational, and his advice felt like guidance from a father he never had. Father Isaac always seemed to care deeply about the youth of the parish, taking time after Mass to check in on them, especially the altar servers. At first, Desmond found this attention flattering, especially since he admired the priest so much. Father Isaac's kind words and pats on the back felt warm and sincere. But over time, what once seemed like harmless gestures started to feel different. It began with little things. Father Isaac's hand lingering a bit too long on Desmond's shoulder after a prayer, the casual hugs that seemed to stretch a little too long, and those late-night chats in the church office that always felt personal. Almost too personal. Desmond didn't know how to interpret it. Was Father Isaac just being kind? Or was there something more? He found himself brushing it off at first, telling himself that Father Isaac was just a caring, fatherly figure to the young men in the parish. But soon it was clear that something wasn't right. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became, but he didn't know what to do. Then, one Sunday after Mass, Father Isaac asked if he could drive Desmond home. Desmond, not thinking much of it, agreed. The ride started off innocently enough, with the two of them discussing the sermon. But the atmosphere in the car quickly shifted. Father Isaac's compliments grew more personal, and as they turned onto a quiet road, the conversation turned to Desmond's appearance. "You're looking more handsome every day, Desmond," Father Isaac said, glancing at him briefly before focusing back on the road. Desmond felt a chill run down his spine. It was strange, uncomfortable. He forced a smile, unsure how to respond. He'd always been taught to respect his elders, but this felt wrong. That night, after another long evening service, Desmond found himself alone with Father Isaac in the church office. The priest had asked him to come by to discuss a small matter about the altar duties, but once Desmond entered, the mood shifted instantly. Father Isaac closed the door behind him with a quiet click and walked towards Desmond. Without warning, he leaned in, trying to kiss him. Desmond's heart raced, and his body froze in shock. He instinctively pulled away, his mind unable to process what was happening. Father Isaac, sensing his hesitation, quickly backed off, but not without trying to justify his actions. "I'm just showing affection, Desmond. It's nothing to be afraid of," he said with a reassuring smile, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. But to Desmond, it was everything but normal. Confusion, fear, and a deep sense of betrayal filled him. The man he trusted had just crossed a line, and Desmond didn't know how to feel or what to do next. Desmond felt like he was drowning in guilt and confusion. Every day he struggled with the impossible question: how could someone he had looked up to, someone he had trusted, do something so awful? The man who had been a spiritual guide, a mentor, was now pushing boundaries in ways that left Desmond sick to his stomach. He couldn't bring himself to fully believe it was happening, but the evidence was right in front of him. And each time Father Isaac's behavior crossed another line, it felt like a punch in the gut. At first, Desmond tried to push it all away. He'd convince himself that he was overreacting, that maybe Father Isaac didn't mean anything by it. But as time went on, it became harder to ignore. The subtle advances, his lingering touches, the private conversations that seemed to go on a little too long, the looks that made Desmond feel uncomfortable, started to weigh on him. But what could he do? Father Isaac had always been the one to lead him, to guide him. How could he betray the church, the one thing that had been his foundation for so long? Things escalated when Father Isaac started inviting Desmond to spiritual meetings outside of regular services. It felt wrong, but Desmond didn't know how to say no. Every part of him was telling him to get away, to run, but he was stuck, torn between his loyalty to the church and his growing discomfort. Every time he tried to brush it off, it just kept happening again. Then one evening, it crossed a line he couldn't ignore. Desmond found himself alone with Father Isaac in the church sacristy. The priest's hands were on him before he could even process what was happening. Desmond froze. His body told him to pull away, to run. But he couldn't. He didn't want to. Was this his fault? Why didn't he fight harder? Afterward, Father Isaac acted like it was nothing, like the kiss had meant nothing at all. But for Desmond, it felt like everything. The guilt gnawed at him constantly. How could he face the world knowing what had happened? And worst of all, who would believe him if he spoke out? The fear was paralyzing. His community was so conservative, he knew they would never believe the truth about Father Isaac. Desmond was trapped, isolated, and scared to speak up. The truth felt like a weight too heavy to carry, and the thought of facing the judgment of his friends and family felt impossible. Desmond's frustration had been building for weeks, suffocating him in silence. The constant tension between him and Father Isaac weighed heavily on his shoulders. Every time he walked into the church, the anxiety churned in his stomach. The priest's advances had become more frequent, more blatant, and with each passing day, Desmond felt a little more trapped, a little more powerless. The guilt and shame gnawed at him, but it was the pressure to stay silent that hurt the most. He had convinced himself for so long that he could handle it, that he could bear the weight of the secret. But now, every time Father Isaac touched him, every time he whispered things that made Desmond's skin crawl, it felt like his world was getting smaller. One evening, after a church meeting, Father Isaac pulled Desmond aside in the church's office. This time there was no pretense, no hiding behind innocent gestures. Desmond could see it in the priest's eyes. The hunger, the determination. Father Isaac stepped closer, cornering him against the wall, and for the first time, Desmond saw the predator for who he really was. Desmond felt his heart race, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The priest's hand reached out, brushing against his cheek, and that's when something inside Desmond snapped. He pushed Father Isaac away, his hands trembling as he backed up. "Stop!" Desmond's voice was raw, his words thick with the pain and anger he had been holding in. "This has to stop. You can't keep doing this to me. I'm not going to let you take advantage of me anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, Father Isaac stood frozen, surprised by the defiance. But Desmond didn't care. He wasn't afraid anymore. The years of silence, the years of fear, had come crashing down in that one instant. Desmond knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. His heart was pounding, his thoughts racing. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every other young man who might fall prey to Father Isaac. He couldn't let the priest continue his behavior, not when he knew the truth. But he also knew that speaking out without proof would do nothing but destroy him. No one would believe him. They'd think he was lying, trying to tear down a man of the cloth. He needed evidence. Desmond's decision was made. He would expose Father Isaac for who he truly was, and he would do whatever it took to bring the priest's dark secret to light. Desmond knew the time had come. He had gathered all the evidence he needed, but now he had to set the trap. He couldn't let Father Isaac slip away, not after everything he had done. Desmond carefully crafted his plan, knowing full well that the priest would never be able to resist the chance to meet in private. He had already figured out the pattern. Father Isaac had always been eager to pull him away after church services, to have their secret conversations. So this time, Desmond took control of the situation. He invited Father Isaac to a secluded spot by the church, a small hidden grove near the back of the property, away from prying eyes. Desmond knew Father Isaac would take the bait. After all, the priest had already shown his interest in their private moments, and this would be no different. Desmond texted him late in the evening, pretending to be conflicted but eager to continue their relationship, assuring Father Isaac that he was ready to meet in private. Desmond knew that Father Isaac's arrogance and belief that he had Desmond wrapped around his finger would lead him right into the trap. The evening arrived, and Desmond waited with his heart pounding in his chest. He hid a small, discreet camera in the bushes, positioning it perfectly so it could capture everything. When Father Isaac finally arrived, his expression was one of anticipation. He had no idea that this meeting was going to be anything but what he expected. Father Isaac stood confidently, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I knew you'd come around, Desmond," he said, stepping closer, thinking he was in control of the situation. But Desmond had had enough. As the priest reached out for him, Desmond stood firm and said, "Stop. I know what you've been doing, and I've been recording everything." Father Isaac froze, his smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice suddenly nervous. Desmond didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and played the recordings of their conversations. His own voice, the priest's attempts to manipulate him, the confession, the photos. "I have everything. The truth is out now, Father," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. At first, Father Isaac tried to deny it. He stammered, but the evidence was undeniable. Desmond could see the colour drain from his face as the weight of the situation hit him. His once confident demeanour crumbled, and in that moment, Desmond knew Father Isaac's carefully constructed world had come crashing down. Desmond's heart raced as he walked into the church office the next day, the weight of the evidence in his hands. His stomach churned with anticipation. He had come this far, but there was no turning back now. He placed the phone, the photos, and the recordings in front of the church leadership, his fingers trembling slightly. The priesthood, the very institution that had shaped his life, was about to be exposed for the darkness it harbored. At first, the church officials were skeptical. They knew Father Isaac as a man of virtue, someone who had led countless parishioners through baptisms, weddings, and funerals. His reputation was untarnished, and they could hardly fathom the accusations. They tried to dismiss Desmond's evidence, claiming it was a misunderstanding, an overreaction, or even a desperate attempt for attention. But as Desmond played the recordings and showed the photos, the truth was undeniable. There was no room for doubt. The church had no choice but to act. Father Isaac was suspended indefinitely, and an investigation was launched into his actions. The once respected priest, a man revered by so many, was now at the center of a scandal that would unravel everything he had built. The community's reaction was swift, but divided. Many refused to believe the accusations at first. Father Isaac had been a father figure to so many, a source of comfort and spiritual guidance. How could such a man, so kind, so revered, betray the trust of the very people who had supported him? Some congregants rallied around Desmond, accusing him of lying, questioning his motives. They couldn't reconcile the priest they had known with the criminal they were now being told existed. But as more evidence emerged, including the testimony of other altar servers who had suffered similar experiences, the truth slowly began to sink in. Father Isaac's facade of righteousness crumbled under the weight of the mounting proof. He was arrested, his secrets laid bare for all to see. The scandal rocked the community to its core. The church, which had once been a symbol of hope and moral guidance, now stood at the epicenter of a crisis. Desmond, once a trusted member of the congregation, was now vilified by some but hailed as a hero by others. Despite the backlash from a few, his courage to speak out started to inspire others to confront the darkness in their own lives. The truth had come to light, and Father Isaac's reign of manipulation was over. The aftermath of exposing Father Isaac left Desmond in a whirlwind of emotions. Despite the sense of justice that surged through him, a deep sorrow lingered. He had done what was right, but the weight of the betrayal, the manipulation, and the confusion were not so easily shaken off. Desmond struggled to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the predator he had exposed. The emotional scars were deeper than he expected, and it became clear that healing wouldn't happen overnight. In an effort to move forward, Desmond began attending therapy to work through the trauma. It wasn't easy, but with each session, he began to untangle the knots of guilt and pain that had haunted him for so long. The community too had its own struggles in the wake of the scandal. Many people were devastated by the revelation of Father Isaac's true nature. Some members left the church entirely, feeling betrayed and disgusted, while others chose to stay, determined to rebuild their faith. It was a painful process, and while the scars remained, there was also a collective effort to heal. The church wasn't perfect, and the corruption within had been exposed. But for some, this was a chance to redefine what faith meant to them. As for Desmond, he found a new sense of purpose. The courage it took to speak out, even when no one believed him, transformed him. He became an advocate for victims of sexual abuse, lending his voice to those who were too scared or silenced to speak their truth. He realized that true bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was facing the truth even when it felt impossible. In time, Desmond found peace. The road ahead was still difficult, but he knew that he had stopped Father Isaac from hurting anyone else. His journey wasn't just about seeking justice. It was about personal growth, healing, and understanding that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us.